The pristine, ice-kissed surface of Willow Lake didn't break. It swallowed. One moment my Sarah stood on the weathered planks of the community dock, a solitary figure silhouetted against the weak disk of the winter sun. A hand rested unconsciously protective on the gentle swell of her 7-month pregnancy. A rare, fleeting smile touched her lips, a tiny rebellion against the oppressive gray of the season. The next, she was simply gone. Vanished into the frigid depths with a sickening, almost silent gulp that the vast stillness of the afternoon seemed to absorb without a ripple. The only sound that tore through the frozen air wasn't Sarah's scream. That had been a strangled, terrified gasp instantly stolen by the lake's brutal, icy shock, but a laugh. Eleanor Vance's laughter. It was sharp, brittle, like the shattering of ancient icicles, and it echoed across the desolate water, with a note of triumphant, unambiguous cruelty that seemed to curdle the very air I breathed. Perhaps that will finally impress upon you the vital importance of respecting established community standards, dear Eleanor's voice honed to a razor's edge and laced with a venom that had been brewing, festering for months, sliced through the cold. Some individuals, it seems, simply require a more immersive lesson in basic compliance. My world fractured, then imploded. My heart, a panicked bird suddenly caged within my ribs, hammered a frantic, deafening rhythm of disbelief and surging terror. I'd been standing at the edge of our unkempt yard, the one that sloped unevenly down towards the communal lake, a rapidly cooling mug of coffee clutched in my numb hand. Just seconds, mere heartbeats, before Sarah, my Sarah, carrying our first child, our longed-for, already named Lily, had been attempting to soak in a fleeting, precious moment of winter warmth. Now she was fighting for her life, for Lily's life, and Eleanor Vance, the self-appointed, undisputed matriarch of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, was cackling from the dock like some grotesque, unhinged character dredged from the darkest corners of a Grimm's fairy tale. 50 yards. It felt like an unbridgeable chasm, an impossible distance. Every raw, primal instinct screamed at me to move, to sprint, to fly. But for one horrifying, elongated second, a strange, suffocating paralysis rooted my feet to the frozen earth. This couldn't be happening. It was a waking nightmare, a grotesque distortion of reality playing out in the flat, unforgiving light of a winter afternoon. Then the fragile dam of my disbelief shattered, and a torrent of raw, unadulterated terror, hotter and more potent than any rage I'd ever known, surged through my veins. My eyes locked with a desperate, consuming intensity on the violent thrashing in the water, the dark fabric of Sarah's heavy winter coat blooming like a morbid spreading flower against the slate-gray surface. Her face chalk-white and contorted in a silent rictus of pure animal fear, broke the surface for a single agonizing instant, her eyes wide with a desperate, unvoiced plea, before she was inexorably pulled under again. Eleanor just stood there, arms crossed, a grotesque, self-satisfied smirk twisting her lips. She had no earthly idea. To her, I was simply Mr. Henderson, Liam Henderson, the quiet, unassuming, rather bland husband of that problematic, non-compliant pregnant woman. The one whose hedges dared to defy the HOA's exacting millimetric bylaws. The one whose very presence, whose quiet happiness with Sarah seemed a personal affront to Eleanor's meticulously curated, rigidly controlled world. She didn't know the man beneath the worn jeans and the faded, paint-stained sweater I often wore while working on my freelance web design projects from my small home office. The world narrowed, tunneled to a single desperate fading pinpoint, Sarah, at its terrifying end. I was already moving the forgotten coffee mug shattering unheeded on the frozen ground as I tore off my heavy jacket, my voice a raw, guttural roar that ripped through the deceptive quiet of the afternoon, a sound of pure anguish. "Sarah, hold on, I'm coming." Eleanor's head snapped towards me, her smug expression faltering just for the barest fraction of a second. A flicker of raw annoyance, perhaps, at the unwelcome interruption of her grotesque victory lap, before her features reformed steeped in smug condescension. Just another hysterical husband she probably thought about to make a futile, embarrassing scene. My boots pounded against the uneven wooden planks of the dock, the vibrations a frantic, jarring echo of my own pulse. I didn't spare Eleanor Vance a glance. My entire being was focused on the churning, roiling water where Sarah had vanished. Without a second's conscious thought driven by a force more powerful than reason, I launched myself awkwardly and desperately into a clumsy, frantic dive. The shock of the cold was a brutal physical blow stealing my breath. The water was murky visibility, almost non-existent, a disorienting, chilling void. My lungs burned. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at me. I was just a man. A terrified husband flailing in the dark, praying I could find her, praying it wasn't too late. Our arrival in Willow Creek 6 months prior had been heralded by dreams of tranquility. We'd envisioned a peaceful haven, a place to nurture our growing family far from the city's relentless pulse. The glossy brochures had peddled a seductive image, smiling families, manicured lawns, the shimmering promise of a tight-knit community. We'd found a modest fixer-upper, its bones sturdy despite its neglected state, boasting a large yard that meandered down to the shared lakefront. Sarah had immediately fallen in love with it. She'd pictured picnics by the water's edge, our child's laughter echoing as they learned to swim in its calm summer embrace. She'd spent weeks, her face alight with joyful anticipation, poring over paint swatches for the nursery, her happiness a tangible warmth that filled our little house. My freelance work allowed me to be home, a quiet presence, but the thought of our expanding family in this seemingly idyllic setting had been a steady, comforting anchor. We encountered Eleanor Vance within our first week. She materialized on our doorstep, a clipboard clutched to her chest like a heraldic shield, her sharp eyes cataloging our slightly untamed lawn with an expression of profound, almost personal offense. "Welcome to Willow Creek," she'd announced, her voice devoid of any genuine warmth, a sterile pronouncement rather than a greeting. "I am Eleanor Vance, president of your Homeowners Association. I trust you've received and thoroughly reviewed the community bylaws and covenants." Her smile was a thin, reptilian stretching of lips that never quite reached her cold, assessing eyes. Sarah, ever gracious, ever hopeful of finding connection, had invited her in for coffee. Eleanor declined with a curt, "I'm rather occupied ensuring the continued aesthetic integrity and upholding the property values of our neighborhood, Mrs. Henderson." That first meeting had been a small, discordant note in our otherwise hopeful symphony. We'd initially dismissed her as officious, perhaps a touch lonely, someone who invested a disproportionate amount of her identity in her HOA responsibilities. We had no premonition, not then, of the chilling malevolence that festered beneath that rigidly controlled exterior. No inkling that her obsession with aesthetic integrity was a thinly veiled euphemism for an insatiable pathological need to dominate and control every soul within her self-proclaimed fiefdom. The initial HOA notices were almost comically trivial. A politely worded but firm letter regarding the precise shade of our mailbox flag, apparently our chosen crimson, was an unacceptable deviation from the approved burgundy standard. Another missive concerned the placement of our trash receptacles on collection day. They were to be positioned precisely 3 inches further from the curb, no more, no less. Sarah, with a sigh and a roll of her eyes, had dutifully complied. "It's utterly ridiculous, Liam," she'd conceded. "But let's just try to keep the peace, shall we? We're the new ones here." I'd agreed, though. A knot of resentment tightened in my gut. Peace, however, was evidently the last thing on Eleanor Vance's agenda. Her focus with an unnerving intensity soon narrowed almost exclusively onto us, and with a particularly disturbing fixation onto Sarah. Perhaps it was Sarah's inherent gentleness, her natural aversion to conflict that rendered her such an irresistible target. Or perhaps, and this thought chilled me even then, it was the radiant, undeniable joy of Sarah's pregnancy, a vibrant, burgeoning symbol of life and hope that Eleanor, in her sterile, joyless existence, seemed to find profoundly offensive. A pregnancy is not an excuse for letting standards slip, Mrs. Henderson. She'd once remarked coolly, when Sarah had been slow to trim a rosebush near the sidewalk to Eleanor's exacting specifications. If anything, it's a time to demonstrate even greater discipline and respect for the community that will nurture your child. The campaign of harassment commenced with insidious subtlety. Passive-aggressive comments delivered at the community mailbox about the rather wild state of our garden, which in truth was slowly but surely blooming under Sarah's tender care. Unsolicited suggestions artfully phrased as friendly advice, but delivered with a condescending sneer about how Sarah ought to be managing her pregnancy, what she should be eating, so many empty calories in that, dear. Think of the baby's development. How much she should be exercising. A brisk walk around the lake twice a day is the minimum I should think for a healthy gestation. Each comment was a tiny, poisoned pinprick, seemingly insignificant on its own, but collectively they began to erode Sarah's natural ebullience. Her bright smiles became a little more strained, her laughter a little less frequent. Then came the anonymous notes, typed on cheap paper slipped into our mailbox. Willow Creek has standards. Some people need to learn them. Or more pointedly, unkempt properties reflect unkempt minds. This is a family community. Sarah tried to brush them off, but I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. The first truly overt confrontation erupted a month later. We'd decided to repaint our front door. Sarah had chosen a cheerful, sunny yellow. We'd submitted the color swatch for HOA approval as stipulated in the voluminous rulebook. Days bled into weeks with no response, assuming perhaps naively that silence signified consent, or simply growing impatient. I'd spent a Saturday meticulously applying the vibrant paint. The very next morning, Eleanor was on our doorstep, her face a mask of apoplectic fury. This is an egregious and utterly unacceptable violation. Mr. Henderson, she'd practically spat, waving a crumpled copy of the bylaws. An unapproved, non-compliant alteration. Sunny yellow, I can assure you, is distinctly, unequivocally, not on the palette of permissible earth tones. We submitted the request weeks ago. Eleanor, I'd replied, struggling to keep my voice even. We received no communication back. Silence does not and never will constitute approval. In Willow Creek, she'd thundered, her voice escalating. This community has standards, Mr. Henderson. Standards you and your wife seem determined to flout. That door will be repainted to an approved shade by the end of this week, or you will face escalating daily fines and a formal complaint lodged with the board. Sarah, drawn by the commotion, had appeared, her face pale. Eleanor, please, she'd said softly. It was just a misunderstanding. We can fix it. Eleanor had turned her venom on Sarah. A misunderstanding, Mrs. Henderson, or a deliberate act of defiance. Perhaps you believe the rules simply do not apply to you because you are in a delicate condition? Her eyes, cold and dismissive, raked over Sarah's bump. Some people I've observed use such circumstances as an excuse for all manner of slovenliness and disregard for communal obligations. It's a sign of weak character, if you ask me. That was the first time I felt a true visceral surge of hot anger, a primal need to shield Sarah from this woman's acidic poison. I stepped directly in front of Sarah. That's quite enough, Eleanor. We will review the approved color palette. Now I strongly suggest you leave our property. Her eyes narrowed at me, glinting with a silent promise of future retribution, before she spun on her heel and marched away, her back ramrod straight. We repainted the door, a drab, spirit-crushing beige, the color of reluctant surrender. The memory of the sunny yellow felt like a distant, quickly fading dream. Eleanor's campaign entered a new, more suffocating phase. She began to rally a small, influential clique of older, similarly disgruntled residents, whispering insidious falsehoods about us. Our applications for minor home improvements were endlessly delayed, then ultimately denied for increasingly ludicrous reasons. She accused us in formally documented complaints of allowing Max, our gentle golden retriever, to bark excessively, though he rarely made a peep. She'd take to standing on the edge of her property, which adjoined ours near the lake, access simply staring at our house sometimes for hours, a silent, unnerving sentinel of disapproval. Sarah started drawing the curtains more often, even on sunny days. The initial joy of our new home was rapidly being choked. She also began leaving things on our porch, a dead bird, a handful of wilted flowers, once a small, crudely made doll, with pins stuck in its belly. We couldn't prove it was her, but we knew. The police said they couldn't do anything without proof. "She's slippery, that one," Officer Collins had said with a sigh when I'd reluctantly reported the doll. "Knows how to push buttons right up to the legal line." One Saturday, the HOA hosted a community barbecue by the lake. Sarah, ever the optimist still trying to integrate, had baked her famous lemon bars. As she approached the communal dessert table, Eleanor intercepted her. "Oh, Sarah, dear Eleanor," cooed her voice, dripping with false sweetness, loud enough for several nearby residents to overhear. "Did you bring those things?" She gestured vaguely towards the platter. "I do hope you used pasteurized eggs given your situation. And really, all that sugar isn't advisable for the baby, you know. We are trying to encourage healthy lifestyle choices here." She dismissed the bars with a wave of her hand. Sarah's face fell. She mumbled an apology and started to retreat. But Eleanor wasn't finished. "And that dress, dear?" She continued, her gaze sweeping critically over Sarah's comfortable maternity smock. "A bit voluminous, isn't it? Almost tent-like. There are some simply lovely maternity lines available these days that are far more flattering. We must endeavor to maintain appearances, mustn't we, even under challenging circumstances?" Sarah fled, tears streaming down her face. I found her by our back fence, the plate of untouched lemon bars abandoned. "I hate her. Liam," she sobbed. "I hate what she's doing. Why won't she leave us alone?" I held her close, my own anger a cold, hard knot. This wasn't about bylaws anymore. This was targeted personal cruelty. The subsequent attack was more insidious. We had planned a small baby shower in our backyard. Just a few close friends and family. 2 days before, a certified letter arrived from the HOA signed by Eleanor. It cited a newly clarified bylaw regarding large gatherings on private property potentially impacting community serenity, and stated that any gathering of more than 10 non-residents now required a special permit, a hefty fee, and unanimous HOA board approval. An approval Eleanor, in an addendum made explicitly clear, would not be forthcoming on such short notice. Due to pressing concerns about noise parking and potential strain on community resources, the letter concluded with chilling formality: "Your intended gathering is hereby prohibited." "She can't do this," I exclaimed, rereading the letter. "This is our private property." "She's inventing rules." Sarah just looked utterly defeated. "What's the point?" "Liam. She'll find another way. She always does. She wants us gone." The shower was canceled. Quiet, embarrassed apologies were made. The vibrant decorations Sarah had so lovingly chosen remained in their boxes, sad symbols of stolen joy. The constant stress was taking a visible toll on Sarah. She wasn't sleeping well. Her appetite waned. Our doctor, concerned about her rising blood pressure, cautioned her about stress. My own helplessness gnawed at me. How could I protect my wife from a woman who wielded bylaws like a weapon and seemed to derive perverse pleasure from inflicting suffering? I began to observe Eleanor Vance more closely, trying to understand the source of her power, the underlying reason for her vindictiveness. Was she merely a bitter, power-hungry woman? Or was there something more, something darker? I noticed how other residents, even those who clearly disliked her, seemed cowed, almost fearful, unwilling to challenge her. There were hushed conversations that abruptly ceased. When she approached, averted gazes, a general miasma of unease. It was clear she had meticulously cultivated an atmosphere of fear. My analytical mind, the one I used for deconstructing complex web problems, began to see a pattern of control that went beyond simple HOA enforcement. The breakthrough, the first real crack in Eleanor's armor, arrived not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, unexpected conversation. Old Mr. Abernathy, a reclusive widower who lived a few houses down, had always been polite in a distant way. One cool evening, as I was taking Max for his walk, I saw him struggling with a large fallen tree limb. I offered to help, and together we managed to drag it to the curb. He was surprisingly grateful and invited me onto his porch for iced tea. As we sat in the fading light, he looked around almost conspiratorially before leaning in, his voice lowered. "You and your wife," he began, his voice a dry rasp. "You're having a rather rough go of it with Eleanor, aren't you?" I nodded, surprised by his directness. "You could say that, Mr. Abernathy. It's been challenging." He sighed a weary, world-worn sound. "She's been this way for years, you know. Seems to get worse with each new family that moves in, especially if they don't immediately bow and scrape. But I suspect there's more to her zeal than just being a busybody." He paused, then fixed me with a serious gaze. "About 5 years back, there was a bit of a scandal. HOA funds, a rather substantial sum allocated for landscaping improvements and shoreline stabilization around the lake. The improvements, when they finally materialized, were minimal, shall we say. And curiously, they mostly benefited the area immediately surrounding Eleanor's own property." He continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "A few folks' brave souls started asking questions, quiet-like. Old man Hemlock, Alistair Hemlock, he was the HOA treasurer back then, a stickler for details. He started digging. Next thing anyone knew, Hemlock had a terrible accident, supposedly fell down his basement stairs, broke his hip, moved away to live with his daughter up north not a month later, and all his financial records, his ledgers, his notes vanished. Poof. A distinct chill snaked down my spine. Are you suggesting Eleanor was involved in something criminal?" Mr. Abernathy shrugged his faded blue eyes, troubled. "I'm not suggesting anything definitively, son. Just telling you what happened, what was whispered." Hemlock was scared. Truly scared. He told me once, just before he left, his voice shaking, that Eleanor had paid him a visit. Told him some things are best left buried, that some ledgers are best left unbalanced. After he left, no one dared question her handling of the HOA finances again. She controls the board, you see. They're either her cronies benefiting in their own small ways, or they're too intimidated to utter a peep. She has a way of making people's lives difficult if they cross her." Mr. Abernathy added, his gaze distant. "Hemlock wasn't the first to regret asking questions, just the one who got hurt most obviously." This was the twist, the unexpected depth to the darkness. Eleanor wasn't just a power-tripping HOA president. She was potentially corrupt, possibly even dangerous, capable of threats and intimidation. This revelation fundamentally altered everything. It was no longer just about petty harassment. If Mr. Abernathy was right, Eleanor had a profound vulnerability, a dark secret that, if exposed, could bring her entire empire crashing down. My mind, accustomed to piecing together disparate facts, began to race. Her obsession with control, her vindictiveness. It wasn't just about maintaining appearances. It was about protecting her position, her secrets. Armed with this explosive, albeit anecdotal information, I began a discreet investigation. As a civilian, I had limited tools, but I was good at research. I formally requested copies of the Willow Creek HOA financial statements for the past 6 years. They were, as Mr. Abernathy hinted, surprisingly vague, full of large, unspecified expenditures under nebulous headings, like community enhancement projects and administrative and consultative services. The budget allocated to lakeside landscaping was indeed disproportionately high year after year, with little tangible evidence of such extensive work around the wider community areas. I started meticulously cross-referencing dates of these expenditures with any visible improvements. The discrepancies were glaring. There were invoices for services that seemed never to have been rendered for materials never purchased. Then Mr. Abernathy, emboldened by my interest, provided another crucial piece. Hemlock was a meticulous man, he told me. He didn't trust leaving all his sensitive papers in the HOA office once he started suspecting Eleanor. He mentioned once he kept his truly important notes, his ace in the hole, as he called it, somewhere safe, somewhere unexpected. He loved his prize-winning roses, tended them like children, said they were good for keeping secrets. It was a long shot. Hemlock's old house had been sold twice. The current owners were a young couple, Chloe and Ben Peterson, new to Willow Creek. On a Saturday morning, feigning an interest in their landscaping, I struck up a conversation. I mentioned Mr. Hemlock, his renowned roses. Chloe pointed to a dilapidated shed. That was Mr. Hemlock's old potting shed, I think. We haven't done much with it. With their permission, I explored the dusty shed. Tucked behind a loose floorboard, wrapped in oilcloth, was a slim leather-bound ledger. Hemlock's ace in the hole. It was meticulously detailed, a shadow accounting of the HOA's finances, dates, discrepancies, photocopies of suspicious invoices Eleanor had signed, alongside Hemlock's sharp annotations questioning their legitimacy. This was tangible proof. As I was leaving the Petersons, Chloe stopped me looking nervous. "Liam, can I talk to you?" "It's about Eleanor." She explained how they'd been pressured to use an overly expensive, Vance-approved contractor for a patio. When they refused, a slew of new petty violations appeared on their property. More disturbingly, Chloe, who had briefly volunteered for the HOA's Welcome Committee, had stumbled upon some shredded, then poorly retaped emails in a discarded binder. They were between Eleanor and a board member. Chloe whispered, showing me the reconstructed messages on her phone. They were discussing reallocating funds from lake maintenance to discretionary presidential projects. It looked like they were stealing Liam. This was it. Corroboration. Another piece of the puzzle locking into place. Eleanor perhaps sensing a shift. Or maybe because her previous tactics weren't driving us out quickly enough, escalated her campaign against Sarah directly, with terrifying intensity. She knew I often worked late into the night on my freelance projects. She began to appear when Sarah was alone, her comments more pointed, more personal. She'd criticize Sarah's appearance. "You're looking exceptionally pale today, dear. Are you entirely certain you're up to the rigors of motherhood, her housekeeping, even her suitability as a mother?" Sarah, though frightened, found a new resolve. "I'm stronger than you think, Eleanor," she'd retort, her voice trembling but firm. This defiance seemed to infuriate Eleanor. "Strength is not defiance, Mrs. Henderson," Eleanor had hissed. "It's knowing your place and adhering to the structures that protect us all. Some people seem determined to tear those structures down." The psychological warfare intensified. Anonymous, vaguely threatening notes became more frequent. Dead flowers appeared on our porch. The week before the incident at the lake, a crucial community meeting was scheduled. Eleanor planned to push through new bylaws granting her unprecedented power to levy fines and place liens without full board approval. It was a blatant power grab. I had been quietly talking to other residents, Abernathy the Petersons, a few others who'd shared their own stories of Eleanor's overreach once they knew they weren't alone. I showed them the discrepancies I'd found in the public HOA financials, though not yet Hemlock's ledger or Chloe's emails holding those close. A small but growing number were starting to see Eleanor for what she was. There was a palpable tension, a sense that a confrontation was brewing. Eleanor knew this. She seemed more on edge, her pronouncements more strident. This community needs strong leadership to protect it from undesirable elements and influences, she'd declared at the previous meeting, her gaze sweeping over me and a few other known dissenters. And I intend to provide that leadership whether certain individuals appreciate it or not. And then came that cold, gray afternoon by Willow Lake. Sarah, desperate for peace, had gone for a short walk. Eleanor must have followed her, seen her opportunity. Perhaps she thought one final terrifying act would break Sarah, drive us out before the crucial HOA meeting, before any more questions could be asked. She had miscalculated. Catastrophically. The water was brutally, shockingly cold, stealing Sarah's breath, her heavy winter clothes instantly becoming a leaden shroud. My desperate dive had been clumsy, driven by sheer terror. I flailed, searching my lungs, screaming for air. Then my hand brushed fabric. Sarah. I wrapped my arms around her, fighting against the weight of her clothes, and the numbing cold kicking frantically, blindly towards the surface. We broke through Sarah, coughing, gasping, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. Liam, she choked, clinging to me. The baby. I've got you, Sarah. I've got you both. Just hold on. My voice was ragged, a harsh whisper. I kicked towards the dock, my muscles screaming every movement, an agony of effort and fear. Eleanor was still standing there, her face a grotesque mask of shock and incandescent fury. The shock, I surmised, was at my sudden appearance, the fury that her victim was being rescued. Get away from her! You interfering fool, Eleanor shrieked as I somehow hauled Sarah's dead weight onto the dock planks. She deserved it. She's a troublemaker. A blight, Sarah was shivering violently, gasping. I quickly, fumbling with numb fingers, tried to assess her. She was coherent, but the cold was a critical risk. Eleanor Vance. I said, my voice flat, devoid of inflection, as cold as the lake water clinging to us. I gently helped Sarah sit, stripping off my own soaked jacket and wrapping it around her, though it offered little warmth. I then reached into my inner pocket, my hand closing around the oilskin-wrapped ledger. I pulled it out. Before you continue your assessment, Eleanor, I said, holding Hemlock's ledger out, its water-stained cover stark against the gray sky, perhaps you'd care to explain Alistair Hemlock's rather detailed notes on the Lakeside Beautification Fund, or these invoices he flagged from Vance Environmental Solutions. Eleanor's tirade choked in her throat, her eyes wide and suddenly darting fixed on the ledger. A flicker of something unreadable, confusion then dawning horrified recognition, crossed her face. That's nonsense. Hemlock was a senile, disgruntled old fool. He fabricated those lies. Was he, Eleanor? I pressed my voice, still dangerously calm, though my heart hammered. Or was he just a man who asked too many inconvenient questions? Much like Chloe and Ben Peterson, who have some rather interesting emails about your creative reallocation of funds from the lake maintenance budget. Emails that detail discussions about using those funds for, and I quote, discretionary presidential projects. Her face already pale, drained of all remaining color. Her arrogant fury visibly crumpled, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of dawning abject terror. You can't. Who do you think you are? She stammered, her voice suddenly thin, reedy, stripped of its power. This is my community. I built this. You have no right." "To you, Eleanor. I was just Mr. Henderson, the quiet husband," I said. Now I reached into the inner pocket of the dry shirt I wore beneath my sodden one. My fingers closed around the familiar cool metal of my badge. I pulled it out, held it up. The winter light glinted dully on its surface. "But to Willow County, I'm Lieutenant Liam Henderson, Sheriff's Office Dive Search and Rescue Team Leader. And you, Eleanor Vance, are under arrest for aggravated assault, attempted murder, and pending full review of this ledger and Mrs. Peterson's evidence, multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The transformation was absolute. The sneering tyrant vanished, replaced by a sputtering, visibly terrified woman. This is a misunderstanding, a terrible misunderstanding. She slipped. I tried to help her." "The ledger, it's a forgery. Those emails are taken out of context. I saw you push her." "Eleanor," I said, my voice devoid of emotion, now only a cold, professional flatness. "And I heard you laugh. And given her pregnant condition and your documented campaign of harassment, those charges are going to stick like glue." I took out my personal cell phone, my fingers surprisingly steady, as I dialed 911 requesting immediate paramedic response for Sarah, citing severe hypothermia risk for a pregnant patient, and multiple patrol units for one Eleanor Vance, currently detained suspect in an attempted homicide and ongoing financial fraud investigation. The distant wail of sirens was at that moment the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Neighbors drawn by the commotion were starting to gather at the periphery of the lakefront, their faces a mixture of confusion, apprehension, and dawning horror. They saw Sarah soaked, shivering uncontrollably, cradling her belly, her face ashen. They saw me waterlogged and grim, my professional demeanor now fully asserted, calmly reciting Eleanor's Miranda rights again as she began to blubber incoherently. And they saw Eleanor Vance, her carefully constructed facade of respectability and authority shattering before their very eyes, her face a mask of terror and disbelief, finally utterly silenced by the weight of her own actions. The paramedics arrived first, a whirlwind of efficient, compassionate action. They bundled Sarah into thermal blankets, started an IV gently palpating her abdomen, listening for the baby's heartbeat. Relief, immense and overwhelming, washed over me as they assured me that while Sarah was suffering from exposure and profound shock, both she and the baby appeared to be stable for the moment. They'd need to transport her to County General immediately. Then the first patrol car crunched onto the gravel. Two uniformed deputies' colleagues I knew stepped out, their expressions grim as I quickly briefed them, pointing to the still babbling Eleanor and handing over Hemlock's ledger to the senior officer. Eleanor tried to protest, to plead, to threaten them with her supposed influence, but her words were hollow, her power extinguished. As one of the deputies firmly cuffed her hands behind her back, the satisfying metallic click echoed the finality of her reign. The sight of Eleanor Vance, the untouchable queen of Willow Creek, being led away in handcuffs in front of the assembled community was a tableau no one present would ever forget. The HOA meeting scheduled for that evening would still happen, but its agenda, and indeed its entire leadership structure, had just undergone a radical, irrevocable alteration. Several neighbors, including Mr. Abernathy and a pale but resolute Chloe Peterson, watched with expressions that mingled shock with a dawning, almost incredulous relief. "It's over," Mr. Abernathy murmured more to himself than anyone else. "After all these years, it's finally over." The aftermath was a maelstrom. Sarah was admitted to the hospital and kept for 2 nights under observation. Our baby girl Lily miraculously was deemed perfectly fine, her tiny, persistent heartbeat a steady drumbeat of resilience. Sarah, however, was deeply traumatized. The terror of the icy water, the crushing weight Eleanor's cruel laughter. These replayed endlessly in her mind. Sleep offered little respite, filled with fractured, terrifying images. Yet beneath the trauma, a new steely strength began to emerge. "She didn't break me, Liam," she whispered, her hand in mine, her eyes filled with a fierce, protective love for our unborn child. She tried, but she didn't win. The Willow Creek community was in profound shock. As news of Eleanor's arrest and the specific shocking charges against her spread, so too did the stories that had been whispered for years. Mr. Abernathy's account of Old Man Hemlock, Chloe Peterson's evidence of financial manipulation, other tales of bullying, of financial irregularities, of petty vendettas, all began to surface, shared now in voices no longer laced with fear, but with a dawning sense of outrage and hesitant relief. My own quiet investigation, combined with Hemlock's ledger, Chloe's emails, Mr. Abernathy's courageous testimony, and that of several other newly emboldened residents, painted a damning, irrefutable picture. Eleanor Vance was formally charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault on a pregnant victim, and as the financial investigation swiftly deepened, multiple counts of felony embezzlement and wire fraud. Her personal assets, including her meticulously maintained house on the lake, were frozen. The carefully constructed facade of her respectable life crumbled to dust. The existing HOA board, stripped of its tyrannical leader and facing intense public scrutiny and potential legal culpability, dissolved in a welter of recriminations and hasty resignations. An interim committee composed of genuinely concerned and ethical residents, including a reluctant but resolute Mr. Abernathy as temporary chair and a surprisingly capable Chloe Peterson as interim treasurer, stepped in to manage the community's affairs, restore transparency, and cooperate fully with the authorities. "We have a lot of rebuilding to do," Chloe said at the first emergency community meeting, her voice clear and steady. "Not just our finances, but our trust in each other." The legal process was lengthy, but the outcome was never truly in doubt. My eyewitness testimony. Sarah's heart-wrenching account, the visual evidence from a neighbor's security camera that had inadvertently captured the distant shove Hemlock's ledger, Chloe's emails, and the mounting financial evidence sealed Eleanor's fate. She was found guilty on all major counts. The judge, in his sentencing remarks, cited her extreme malice, her chilling lack of remorse, the calculated cruelty of her actions, and the profound vulnerability of her pregnant victim. He sentenced her to a significant prison term. Her house in Willow Creek, bought and lavishly maintained with years of ill-gotten HOA funds, was seized as part of the restitution. The reign of Eleanor Vance was definitively over. Slowly, painstakingly, Willow Creek began to heal. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a tentative, then growing sense of freedom and camaraderie. Neighbors started talking to each other again, not in hushed whispers, but in open, relaxed conversation. The restrictive, nonsensical bylaws were systematically dismantled and rewritten by the interim committee, guided by common sense and a genuine spirit of community. Sarah's recovery was a journey. She attended therapy, finding solace in talking through the trauma. For weeks, the sight of the lake was a trigger. But she was determined. She started a small community garden near the clubhouse, a project that brought neighbors together, their hands in the earth. "This is about planting something new." She told me, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, a genuine smile finally gracing her lips. "Something good." 3 months after the incident, just as the first tentative buds of spring were beginning to show, Sarah gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl. We named her Lily Aurora. Lily for resilience, Aurora for a new dawn. Holding her in my arms, her tiny fingers curled trustingly around mine, I felt a profound, almost overwhelming sense of peace, of a future hard won and reclaimed. We talked about moving, but ultimately we decided to stay. Leaving would have felt like letting Eleanor win. This was our home, and now finally it truly felt like it. The community, in a way we could never have anticipated, rallied around us. Their support became a warm, healing balm. To celebrate the true end of Eleanor's reign and the beginning of a new chapter, the interim committee led by Mr. Abernathy and Chloe organized the first Willow Creek Renewal Festival by the lake. There were games for children, a potluck, where Sarah's lemon bars were this time the star attraction, and a heartfelt speech by Mr. Abernathy about the resilience of community. As dusk fell, residents lit floating lanterns, each carrying a wish for the future, and set them adrift on the now peaceful waters of Willow Creek. Watching them bob gently, their warm light reflecting in Sarah's smiling eyes as she held Lily close, I felt a profound sense of hope. Life settled into a new, gentler rhythm, one marked by the gurgles and smiles of our daughter, by the quiet satisfaction of watching a community actively rebuild itself on foundations of trust and mutual respect. The memory of that terrible day by the lake would never fully fade a scar on our shared history, but it no longer held the power to terrorize. Instead, it served as a stark reminder of how insidiously darkness can take root, but also of how courage, truth, and the simple collective act of standing up for what's right can ultimately bring forth the light. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, no place ever is, but it was ours, a community forged not merely of pristine lawns and approved paint colors, but of real people, flawed and resilient, who had faced down a tyrant and emerged stronger, more united, and ready to embrace the future together. The laughter we heard by the lake now was genuine, the joyful sound of children playing, of neighbors sharing stories, the resonant echo of a hard-won, deeply cherished peace.